The town hall was buzzing with excitement that evening. It was a small charity concert, arranged every year to raise funds for the local children's hospital. Families had come dressed in their best clothes, filling the room with laughter, chatter, and the warm smell of coffee drifting from the refreshment table at the back. The old piano stood proudly on the stage, polished just enough to catch the light from the chandelier above. It wasn't new, but it carried years of music within its wooden frame. The program had already started, and a group of young students had just finished playing a cheerful tune. Their families clapped loudly, some even whistling in encouragement. After them, a man performed a song on his guitar, and a few high school singers followed. It was the kind of evening where people came not to judge but to enjoy, to celebrate the joy of community and simple talent. Among the audience sat a woman no one seemed to recognize. She had come in quietly, almost unnoticed, and taken a seat near the back. Her clothes were plain, a long coat, comfortable shoes, and a scarf loosely wrapped around her neck. There was something calm about her, yet something distant too, like she carried thoughts too heavy for words. She clapped softly after every performance but never joined in the loud cheers. Her eyes stayed fixed on the piano more than on the performers themselves. The event organizer, a cheerful man with a booming voice, walked across the stage, reading names from a small paper. "All right, folks, next up we have..." He looked around, but it seemed someone hadn't shown up. The performer listed next was supposed to play a short piano piece, but the seat was empty. He frowned playfully, trying to fill the gap. "Seems like our next musician has stage fright," he joked, and the audience laughed. Not wanting to break the flow of the show, he scanned the crowd and spotted the quiet woman sitting near the instrument. With a friendly grin, he said, "Ma'am, you've been watching the piano all evening. Do you play by any chance?" The crowd chuckled, thinking it was a light-hearted tease. But to everyone's surprise, the woman looked up slowly. She didn't laugh. Instead, she hesitated, her lips parting as if she wanted to say something but wasn't sure if she should. The organizer sensed her shyness and said warmly, "Just a few notes, maybe? We'd all love to hear something while we wait for our next act." There was a brief pause. She looked around, seeing dozens of curious faces turned her way. For a moment, she seemed unsure whether to accept. Her fingers fiddled with the end of her scarf, and she took a small breath. Finally, she gave a small nod. The audience applauded lightly as she stood and slowly made her way toward the stage. Her steps were careful, quiet, and her movements gentle. She didn't seem nervous, but she didn't seem fully confident either, just someone used to being unnoticed. As she reached the piano, she gave a small bow to the audience, more out of respect than habit, and then sat down on the bench. The microphone above the piano picked up the soft creak of the seat. The hall grew still. Even the chatter at the back faded as everyone waited to hear what this unknown lady would play. She rested her hands on her lap for a moment, eyes closed. Her fingers twitched slightly as if remembering something from long ago. Then she placed them lightly on the keys. The first few notes she played were soft and uncertain, like she was testing both the instrument and herself. They were simple, just a small melody that floated through the air. The sound wasn't perfect. One or two keys were slightly out of tune and her hands trembled just a bit. Some people exchanged polite smiles, thinking it was kind of her to try. No one expected more than a few simple notes. But after a few seconds, something subtle changed. The woman's shoulders relaxed and her hands began to move with more ease. Her expression softened, her eyes half closing as if she were slipping into a memory. The melody deepened. Her fingers moved faster, smoother, with growing confidence. The notes started to blend into something beautiful, something alive. The audience went silent again, not out of politeness but out of surprise. The hesitant tune had transformed into a graceful flow of sound. The melody had a quiet sadness to it, but also warmth, like sunlight breaking through clouds. It wasn't just music, it was feeling. Every note carried a touch of longing, of something left unsaid. The children in the front row stopped whispering. The man who had been filming the event for social media lowered his phone, simply listening. The organizer, standing to the side of the stage, watched with disbelief, his eyes wide. The woman's hands moved faster now, weaving between soft and strong notes, shifting emotions like turning pages in a story. Her head tilted slightly with the rhythm, and a small smile formed at the corner of her mouth. It was as though she had forgotten the crowd entirely and was lost in her own world. No one knew who she was, but it was clear this wasn't a beginner's attempt. This was experience, control, and emotion, all wrapped in one performance. Her music didn't sound like something practiced for applause. It sounded like something remembered from the heart. At the back of the hall, an elderly man whispered to his wife, "She plays like someone who's lived through a lot." His wife nodded silently, not taking her eyes off the stage. As the music filled the room, people began to sense that what they were witnessing wasn't planned. This wasn't part of the schedule, but it was becoming the most memorable moment of the night. The way she played made people feel something they hadn't felt in a long time. It reminded them of the kind of music that speaks when words fail, the kind that connects strangers through shared silence. The melody slowly softened again, as if returning to where it began. Her hands slowed, her breathing became visible, calm and steady. Then, with one last gentle touch of the keys, the music faded away. The final note lingered in the air, trembling slightly before disappearing into silence. For a long moment, no one moved. The hall stayed quiet, filled with that delicate emptiness that follows something extraordinary. Then a single clap broke the stillness, followed by another. Within seconds, the room erupted into applause, loud, genuine, heartfelt. People stood to their feet cheering, some even calling out words of admiration. The woman looked startled at first, as though she had forgotten she was performing for anyone. She smiled shyly, her cheeks turning a little red. She stood slowly, gave a small nod of gratitude, and stepped away from the piano. As she walked back toward her seat, people reached out to shake her hand or whisper compliments. "That was beautiful. You're amazing. Where did you learn to play like that?" She only smiled softly and said, "Thank you," in a quiet voice. The organizer met her halfway down the aisle, still clapping, still amazed. "That was incredible," he said with genuine warmth. "You must have played for years," the woman gave a gentle smile. "A long time ago," she replied, her tone humble, almost nostalgic. When she returned to her seat, the crowd was still buzzing with talk about her. Some wondered if she was a professional musician, others said she must have trained at some prestigious academy. But she didn't say another word. She just sat quietly again, hands folded in her lap, eyes focused on the stage as if nothing special had happened. For the rest of the evening, people couldn't stop talking about her performance. Even as other acts continued, the audience kept glancing toward the back of the room where she sat. The atmosphere had changed. Everyone was still polite and cheerful, but there was an unspoken feeling that they had just witnessed something rare, something deeply human and real. When the event ended, a few people approached her again. One woman said, "I wish my daughter could play with such emotion." Another said, "You should perform more often." The pianist only smiled faintly, replying, "Music was my old friend. I just hadn't spoken to it in a while." She left quietly after that, slipping through the doors before most people noticed. Outside, the evening air was cool and still. The sound of laughter and music drifted faintly from inside the hall as she walked down the quiet street, her steps slow but peaceful. The organizer stood at the doorway, watching her leave, still wondering who she was. He didn't even know her name, yet he felt that her short performance had somehow changed the entire night. Later, as he packed up, he glanced again at the piano. It looked the same as before, but it somehow felt different, as though it had shared a secret it hadn't told in years. No one knew then that this quiet woman, who played just a few minutes of music, would soon touch millions once her story spread. But for that night in that small hall, she was simply the unknown lady who had been asked to play, and had reminded everyone what true beauty sounds like when it comes straight from the heart. The next morning, the little town was still talking about the mysterious woman who had played the piano at the charity concert. The video someone had recorded on their phone had already started spreading around the community. People were sharing it on social media, adding short captions like, "You won't believe this performance," and "She came out of nowhere and played like a professional." At the local cafe, two women who had attended the event were talking excitedly while waiting for their coffee. One said, "I swear the way she played gave me goosebumps. She didn't even look nervous. It was like the piano was part of her." The other nodded. "I've never heard anything like that. Who is she? I don't remember seeing her around before." No one knew her name. She hadn't signed up to perform. She hadn't spoken much, and by the time the show ended, she was gone. Yet everyone who had been there couldn't stop thinking about her. Even those who hadn't seen the concert were now hearing about her from friends and neighbors. Meanwhile, the woman herself sat quietly by the window of her small apartment, sipping tea. Her piano performance from the night before still played in her mind. She hadn't planned to perform. She hadn't played in front of anyone for years. But something about that night had stirred something deep within her, a feeling she hadn't felt in a long time. Her apartment was small and simple. The curtains were thin, letting in the pale morning light. On one side of the room stood a worn piano covered with a soft sheet. It was old, the edges chipped, but it was hers. She had brought it with her when she moved to town a few years ago. Hardly anyone knew she had it. It hadn't been touched much except on quiet evenings when she played softly to herself, never loud enough for anyone to hear. She ran her fingers over the sheet covering the instrument, feeling the shape of the keys beneath. Memories returned, of a time long ago when music wasn't just something she loved. It was her life. Back then she had played on big stages. She had worn elegant dresses and felt the warm glow of lights on her face. The sound of applause had been familiar to her. She had taught music to children, shared her passion with them, and believed that she would play forever. But life had other plans. Years ago, after losing someone dear to her, she had stopped playing. The piano became too painful. Every note reminded her of what she had lost, of a time she couldn't bring back. She told herself she would only stop for a while, but weeks turned into months and months into years. The silence became her new normal, until last night. When the organizer had called out to her from the stage, she hadn't known why she said yes. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was something in the way the piano seemed to be waiting. When she sat down and felt the keys beneath her hands, it was as if all those years melted away. Her fingers remembered what her heart had tried to forget. As she looked out the window now, she smiled faintly. The applause from last night echoed faintly in her mind. She hadn't realized how much she'd missed that feeling, not the attention, but the connection. The way music brought people together, the way it spoke without words. That afternoon, she decided to take a walk. The air was cool and the streets were calm. As she passed the cafe, she overheard people talking again about the concert. She paused by the window for a moment, watching them gesture with excitement. It made her both proud and shy at the same time. She didn't want fame. She never had. All she had wanted was to play again, even if only once. But part of her wondered if maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to bring music back into her life. When she reached the park, she sat on a bench near the fountain. Children were playing, their laughter echoing across the square. She closed her eyes and listened, not to the noise, but to the rhythm of it all. Even the wind seemed to carry a melody. She realized that music had always been around her. She had just stopped hearing it for a while. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the town in shades of gold and orange, the organizer from the concert decided to find her. He had been thinking about her performance all day. He wanted to thank her properly, maybe even invite her to perform again. But there was a problem. He didn't know her name, where she lived, or how to contact her. He asked a few people who had been sitting nearby that night, but no one knew much. Someone remembered that she had come alone and left quietly. Another thought she might have recently moved into town. Finally, an elderly woman who worked at the library said she had seen her before. "She comes in sometimes to borrow old music books," the librarian said. "She's very quiet but kind." That was enough of a clue. The next morning, he visited the library and asked about her. The librarian smiled softly and said, "I believe she lives in the apartments near the park. She's been there for a few years." A gentle soul, that one. Later that day, he knocked on her door. For a moment, there was silence. Then the door opened slightly and she appeared, surprised but polite. "Hello," she said softly. "Hi," he began, smiling warmly. "I'm sorry to bother you. I was organizing the charity concert last night. I just wanted to thank you for what you did. Your performance was incredible." She smiled modestly and nodded. "It was nice to play again," she replied quietly. He could tell she wasn't used to praise. "You know," he continued, "people haven't stopped talking about you. Everyone was touched by your music. Would you consider performing again next month? We're planning another event." Her eyes widened slightly. "Oh, I don't know," she said, her voice uncertain. "I wasn't planning to play in public again." He didn't push her. "I understand," he said kindly. "But if you ever change your mind, we'd be honored to have you." He handed her a small card with his number on it. She took it, thanked him, and promised to think about it. After he left, she stood by the door for a long moment, looking at the card in her hand. Part of her wanted to refuse. She had built a quiet, peaceful life, far away from the stage and the attention. But another part, the one that had come alive on that piano bench, whispered that maybe it was time to return to the world she once loved. That night, she uncovered her old piano again. The keys were a little dusty, but still beautiful. She sat down and pressed one softly. The sound filled the small room, warm and familiar. She smiled to herself and began to play. The melody that flowed out was slow and gentle, like a conversation between her heart and her hands. She played until the sky outside grew dark and the stars began to show. The music seemed to pour out of her without effort, as though it had been waiting all this time. The next few days passed quietly, but something inside her had shifted. Every morning she found herself sitting at the piano playing small pieces. Sometimes she smiled, sometimes she cried, but each day she felt lighter. Music was healing her, note by note. Meanwhile, the video from the concert continued to spread. People began sharing it beyond the town, amazed by her skill and emotion. Comments poured in, words like beautiful, soulful, and unforgettable. Some even asked, "Who is this woman?" But no one had an answer. One evening, as she was coming home from the grocery store, a young girl approached her shyly. "Excuse me," the girl said, holding up her phone. "Are you the lady who played the piano at the concert?" The woman smiled softly. "Yes," she admitted. The girl's eyes lit up. "My mom showed me your video. I've been learning piano too. You inspired me to keep practicing." For a moment, the woman was speechless. She hadn't realized her small moment on stage could touch someone like that. She smiled and said gently, "Keep playing. Music is a friend that never leaves you." That night, as she sat by her piano again, her heart felt lighter than it had in years. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing for sure. Her music had found its way back into the world. And maybe, just maybe, it was where it was meant to be all along. Days passed, but the memory of that night still lived in everyone's minds. The charity concert had been just another small-town event. But that single moment, the one where a quiet woman sat at the piano and poured her heart into the music, had turned it into something unforgettable. People kept sharing the story everywhere they could, and the short video clip continued to spread. The woman, however, didn't think much about the attention. She didn't even know how popular the video had become. She spent her mornings quietly, walking through the park, stopping by the library, and sometimes sitting by the river where the water made a soft, endless sound. She preferred peace over attention. The only thing that had changed in her daily life was the piano. She now played it every evening. It became her way to breathe. Every note she played filled her small apartment with warmth. Sometimes she played classical pieces she had once loved. Other times she created her own melodies, soft and emotional. She didn't write them down or record them. She simply played and let them disappear into the night. One morning she received a knock on her door. It was the same organizer who had invited her to play at the charity event. He was smiling brightly. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said. "Not at all," she replied kindly, inviting him in. He sat down and said, "I just wanted to let you know. Your video has gone viral. It's everywhere. People are talking about you, about your music. They're calling you the unknown pianist." Her eyes widened slightly. "Viral?" she repeated softly, as if the word didn't quite fit her quiet world. He nodded, almost laughing. "Yes, it's been shared thousands of times. People are inspired by you. They keep asking who you are, where you learned to play. You've touched so many hearts." The woman listened quietly. She wasn't sure what to feel. A part of her was happy. Music had always been her way of connecting with people. But another part felt nervous. She had built her life away from attention, away from the stage lights. "I didn't mean to draw attention," she said after a while. "I only played because someone asked me." He smiled gently. "Sometimes that's all it takes. One moment, one song. You reminded everyone that real music isn't about fame, it's about feeling. And people felt it." She looked down at her hands resting on her lap. "I suppose music finds its way even when we try to hide it," she said softly. Before leaving, he added, "We're hosting another concert next month. It's a community event, outdoors this time. Would you come and play again? People would love it." She hesitated. The thought of standing before a crowd again made her heart race. But at the same time, she felt a quiet pull inside her. "I'll think about it," she said honestly. For the next few days, she couldn't stop thinking about it. She found herself replaying that night in her mind, the way the music had flowed, how people had listened in silence, how the applause had felt like a warm wave. She remembered the faces of the people in the crowd, especially the young girl who had told her she'd started learning piano after watching her video. That memory stayed with her. The next evening, she sat at her piano and tried playing the same melody she had performed that night. But this time she didn't just repeat it, she built on it. She let her hands move freely, adding new parts, weaving emotions she hadn't expressed before. It was softer, more honest, and full of life. As she played, she thought about the years she had lost to silence, the years when she believed music had no place left in her life. She realized that perhaps she hadn't really lost those years. Maybe she had just been gathering the emotions that now poured out through her fingers. She stopped playing and sat quietly for a while, looking at the piano. The idea of performing again still scared her, but the fear felt different now. It wasn't the fear of failure. It was the fear of opening her heart too wide. Music, she knew, had a way of exposing the deepest parts of the soul. A few days later, she decided to visit the town square, where people were already preparing for the upcoming outdoor concert. The stage was small, surrounded by strings of lights and rows of chairs. She stood at a distance, watching volunteers set things up. The organizer saw her and waved. "You came?" he said cheerfully as he walked over. "I just wanted to see how things were going," she replied with a smile. "Perfect timing," he said. "We were just talking about adding one more performer. Are you ready to say yes?" She looked around, the sunlight reflecting off the piano that had been placed on stage, the people smiling, the sound of laughter filling the air. Something inside her softened. "All right," she said finally. "I'll play." The organizer's face lit up. "That's wonderful. Everyone will be thrilled." For the next few days, she practiced quietly in her apartment, preparing a piece that meant something special to her. It wasn't a showy or complex composition. It was simple and honest, like a story told through notes instead of words. She wanted to share not just skill, but emotion. When the day of the event arrived, the town square was filled with people. Families sat on benches, children ran around with balloons, and the warm evening breeze carried the scent of flowers from a nearby garden. The atmosphere was cheerful, full of life. As the concert began, local singers and musicians took turns performing. There was laughter, applause, and the sound of community all around, but everyone knew who they were waiting for. When the organizer stepped onto the stage and said, "Now please welcome the lady whose music touched all our hearts," the crowd erupted into cheers. The woman stepped up slowly, her hands clasped together. She didn't dress fancy, just a simple, modest outfit, but she carried a quiet grace that drew everyone's eyes. As she sat at the piano, the crowd went silent, just like before. She took a deep breath and began to play. The first notes were gentle, floating through the warm evening air. The melody carried peace and reflection. It wasn't the kind of music that demanded attention. It simply invited people in. Her fingers moved gracefully, every movement deliberate, every sound full of emotion. People listened in awe. The sound of the piano blended with the distant laughter of children, the rustle of leaves, and the soft wind that carried the notes beyond the square. The music felt alive. It told a story of loss, healing, and rediscovery. Some people closed their eyes. Others held hands, feeling something they couldn't describe. The music reached beyond age and words. It was pure feeling. As she played the final part, her eyes glistened. She wasn't just performing. She was sharing a piece of her life. When the last note faded, there was that same quiet pause. Then the applause came, strong and endless. She stood and bowed slightly, humbled. Tears welled up in her eyes, not from sadness, but from gratitude. She had been afraid to return to music, afraid that the world had forgotten her, or that she no longer belonged in it. But now she realized she had never truly left it. The music had always been waiting. After the show, people came up to thank her again. Some told her how her music had reminded them of someone they loved. Others said it gave them hope. She listened to each one, smiling softly. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, but it didn't feel overwhelming. It felt like connection. As the evening came to an end, the organizer walked up to her, holding a small bouquet of flowers. "You did it again," he said with a grin. "You made everyone feel something real." She accepted the flowers gently. "I didn't do much," she said. "I just played what was in my heart." He shook his head. "That's exactly what makes it special." As she walked home that night, the air was cool and calm. The streetlights glowed softly and the stars shone above. She felt lighter, as if a weight she had carried for years had finally lifted. When she reached her apartment, she placed the flowers in a glass of water and sat by her piano again. Her hands rested on the keys and she smiled to herself. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was playing alone. The world had listened, and in doing so, it had given her back a part of herself she thought was gone forever. The piano had once been a reminder of what she lost. Now it was a reminder of what she had found again: her purpose, her peace, and her voice. A week had passed since the outdoor concert, yet the feeling of that night still lingered in the town. The sound of her piano playing seemed to echo in everyone's minds. The people who had attended couldn't stop talking about how deeply her music had touched them. Even those who hadn't been there had watched the videos online and shared them with friends, adding words like unreal, beautiful, and pure emotion. The woman, however, stayed the same, humble, quiet, and calm. She didn't let the sudden attention change her. She still lived her simple life, visiting the market in the mornings, greeting neighbors softly, and spending her evenings by the piano. Yet something had changed inside her. For years she had carried a quiet emptiness, but now that space was filled again, with music, warmth, and connection. One morning, she received a letter in her mailbox. It wasn't from the town or the concert organizer. The envelope was cream-colored, and the handwriting on it was neat and careful. She opened it slowly. Inside, there was a short note. It said, "Your music reached my hospital room. I haven't been able to move much these past months, but hearing you play gave me peace. I don't know who you are, but please never stop sharing your gift." The letter had no name at the bottom, just "Thank you" from a listener. She sat by the window holding that piece of paper for a long time. The words were simple, but they struck her deeply. She realized that what she had done wasn't just about performing. It was about giving something invisible but real, a small bit of light to someone who needed it. That afternoon, she decided to visit the local hospital. She didn't tell anyone she was coming. She simply brought her small keyboard and asked the nurse if she could play in the waiting area for a short while. The nurse looked surprised but smiled. "Of course," she said. "We'd love that." So she sat down quietly in the corner, plugged in the little keyboard, and began to play. The soft sound drifted through the halls, touching everyone who passed by. Nurses paused for a moment between their rounds. Families stopped whispering and listened, and even patients in wheelchairs smiled faintly. Her music filled the sterile, quiet air of the hospital with warmth. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just gentle and full of peace. She didn't play for applause. She played for hearts. When she finished, a few people clapped softly, and one nurse came to her with tears in her eyes. "That was beautiful," the nurse said. "You have no idea how much the patients needed that." The woman smiled kindly. "Music has its own way of healing," she said. "It speaks when words can't." From that day on, she began visiting the hospital once a week. She would sit in the same spot, play soft melodies, and quietly leave afterward. No one even knew her full name. They just called her the lady who plays for the heart. Soon, people started leaving small thank you notes for her near the piano in the lobby. Some wrote about how her music helped them through pain. Others said it gave them hope during recovery. Every letter reminded her why she had loved music in the first place. It wasn't about perfection or fame. It was about connection. One evening, as she returned home, she found the concert organizer waiting near her building. He smiled as she approached. "You're hard to find these days," he said with a light laugh. She chuckled softly. "I've been busy," she replied. "I heard about what you've been doing at the hospital," he said, his tone warm. "People are talking about it again. You're becoming somewhat of a local legend." She shook her head. "I'm not trying to be famous," she said sincerely. "I just play where it feels needed." "That's exactly why people admire you," he said. "You're real. Your music feels honest." He handed her a flyer. "There's another event next month in the city. It's much bigger. Musicians from everywhere are coming to perform. I was invited and I thought maybe you'd like to join." She looked at the flyer quietly. It was a professional event, not just a small community gathering. The idea of playing on such a big stage again made her nervous. It had been so many years since she had faced a large audience. "I don't know," she said softly. "That seems too much for me." The organizer nodded with understanding. "Think about it," he said. "But no matter what you decide, just know that your music belongs wherever hearts are listening." That night she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the invitation. She wasn't chasing recognition, she never wanted that. But deep inside, she wondered if maybe it was time to share her music beyond her small town. Maybe her story, her sound, could remind others that it's never too late to rediscover what you love. She sat at her piano and began to play. The tune that came out was different from her usual ones, stronger, bolder, but still full of emotion. It was a mixture of courage and calmness, like the beginning of something new. Over the next few days, she practiced more often. Each note felt like a step forward, out of her comfort zone, but toward something meaningful. She didn't tell anyone she had decided to go to the city. She simply packed her small bag, her sheet music, and a heart full of hope. When she arrived at the city venue, the noise and energy were overwhelming. The hall was large, filled with bright lights, banners, and performers bustling about. People tuned their instruments, checked their microphones, and rehearsed quickly. She stood quietly near the edge, watching, taking it all in. A young man, one of the event coordinators, approached her kindly. "Are you one of the performers?" he asked. "Yes," she replied softly. "Name, please?" he asked, holding a clipboard. She hesitated for a moment, then said simply, "Just put me down as the unknown pianist." He raised his eyebrows but smiled. "All right, that's a first," he said, writing it down. When it was her turn to perform, she walked onto the stage slowly. The lights felt brighter than she remembered, and the crowd seemed endless. For a second, her heart raced, but then she looked at the piano. It was there, familiar, waiting for her like an old friend. She sat down, took a deep breath, and began to play. The hall fell silent. The first few notes were calm and steady, carrying the same warmth she had once brought to the small town. As she played, her nerves disappeared. The sound filled the room, not loud but powerful in emotion. Her fingers moved with a mixture of grace and memory, every motion natural and sure. The audience could feel it. They weren't just hearing music. They were feeling a story unfold, a story of someone who had once given up and then found her way back. Each note spoke of patience, loss, courage, and rediscovery. By the time she reached the final part of her piece, a deep stillness filled the hall. It was as if everyone was holding their breath, afraid to miss a single sound. When the last note faded, the room remained quiet for a long heartbeat before the applause came. Loud, sincere, endless. The woman looked up, tears glistening in her eyes. She stood and bowed slightly, her smile small but full of gratitude. For her, it wasn't about the cheering or the recognition. It was about something much deeper. The feeling of being alive again through the music that had once saved her. After the performance, people came to speak with her backstage. Musicians praised her emotional depth. Audience members thanked her for moving them to tears. But she stayed humble, speaking softly and kindly to each person. One woman, holding a small child, said, "Your music reminded me of my mother. She used to play like that. Thank you for bringing that memory back." The pianist's heart softened. "That means more to me than anything," she said quietly. That night, as she walked out of the venue, she looked up at the stars above the city. They looked the same as they did back home. She smiled, realizing that music had brought her full circle, from silence to song, from fear to freedom. She didn't know what the future held, whether she'd play on more stages or return to her quiet life. But it didn't matter. She had learned that true talent isn't about being known. It's about being honest with your heart and brave enough to share it. And that, she thought, was enough. The morning after the concert in the city, the woman woke up in her small hotel room with sunlight gently slipping through the curtains. The world outside seemed peaceful, yet her heart was still full of the sounds from the night before. The applause, the faces, the energy. It all felt unreal, like a beautiful dream she didn't want to wake from. She sat up slowly, her hands resting on the blanket. The same hands that had once hesitated to touch a piano key had just played in front of hundreds of people. For years she had kept her gift hidden, believing it no longer mattered, but now she knew it always had. After breakfast, she decided to take a quiet walk through the city. The streets were lively. Vendors calling out, children laughing, cars rushing past. But she felt calm inside, as if a heavy weight had finally been lifted from her shoulders. Every step she took reminded her that life still held meaning, even after everything she had gone through. When she reached a small park, she sat on a bench near a group of children chasing each other. Their laughter made her smile. She noticed an old man sitting across from her reading a newspaper. After a while, he looked up and said, "You're the lady who played last night, aren't you?" She blinked in surprise. "You were there?" He nodded with a gentle smile. "I don't usually go to events like that. My granddaughter begged me to take her. I wasn't expecting much, but when you played, it reminded me of something I'd lost a long time ago." Her eyes softened. "What was that?" "My love for music," he said quietly. "I used to play the violin when I was younger, but life got busy and I stopped. I thought it didn't matter anymore. But watching you, I realized it's never too late to start again." The woman smiled. "It's never too late," she repeated. "Music always waits for you. It never leaves, it just gets quiet until you're ready to listen again." The old man nodded, his eyes warm. They sat together in silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the park, the wind, the laughter, the distant hum of the city. It was peaceful. Later that afternoon, she returned to the train station. It was time to go home. The platform was busy with travelers, and as she waited for her train, she took out the letter she had kept folded inside her bag. The one from the hospital listener who had thanked her weeks ago. She still didn't know who had written it, but it had changed her life. She read it again, smiling. It reminded her why she had played in the first place, not for fame or recognition, but to reach someone's heart. She carefully folded it back and tucked it away before boarding the train. As the train moved through the countryside, she looked out the window, watching the passing fields and small houses. The sound of the tracks blended in her mind with melodies she had played before. Every click of the train wheels felt like a heartbeat, steady, alive, moving forward. When she reached her town, evening had begun to fall. The air was cool and the sky painted with soft shades of gold and blue. As she walked through the familiar streets, a few people recognized her. They smiled, waved, and said kind words. "You made us proud," one woman said. Another added, "Your music touched everyone, even those who weren't there." She thanked them softly, feeling humbled. She never thought her music would travel beyond her small world, but it had, and not because she tried to make it happen, but because she had played from her heart. The next morning, she returned to her usual routine. She went to the market, bought fresh bread, and greeted the shopkeeper. Life was still the same, simple and steady, but it felt different now. It was fuller, brighter, more connected. Later, she visited the hospital again. When she walked into the lobby with her small keyboard, the nurses smiled and clapped quietly. "You're back," one of them said happily. She nodded, smiling. "I promised I'd return." This time there were more people waiting to hear her play. Some were sitting in wheelchairs, others lying in beds rolled near the door. A few family members stood nearby, holding their loved ones' hands. She took her place in the corner and began to play. The notes flowed softly at first, like whispers of a gentle breeze. Then as her hands moved, the sound grew warmer and more alive. She could see how the music eased the faces of those listening, their shoulders relaxing, their eyes softening. A few closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them. One little girl sitting with her mother held a small stuffed bear tightly. When the woman finished the piece, the girl walked up shyly and said, "You play like you're telling a story." The woman smiled warmly. "Maybe I am," she said. "What story did you hear?" The girl thought for a moment. "A story about someone who was sad, but then they found something that made them happy again." The woman's eyes filled slightly and she nodded. "That's a good story," she said softly. "And you're right. That's exactly what it is." After the performance, the head nurse came to thank her again. "You've become a part of this place," she said kindly. "Everyone looks forward to your visits. You don't know how much it means." The woman felt touched. "They give me as much as I give them," she said. "Their smiles, their silence, it all reminds me that music is alive only when it's shared."